Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 3 of the Millennial Buddhist podcast. Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome to episode number 3 of the Millennial Buddhist podcast. Thank you for listening to us today. I have a fantastic interview with Aric Parker. Aric is an amazing guy who is going to tell his story of going from the United Church of Christ to Buddhism. He speaks with bravery about childhood trauma that he endured and how meditation helped him with some spiritual healing as it relates to that. And he also talks about what journey led him to Naropa University. So it's a really in-depth interview. So I invite you to please just sit back, relax, and enjoy this one. It's a good one. Hello and welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Millennial Buddhist. I am Marvin. Today I'm joined by a very, very special guest. Aric Parker has joined us today on the Millennial Buddhist. He is a very good friend of the first person I interviewed. If you check out the podcast, episode 1 is with Ashira, and Aric and Ashira are good friends. They both live in Colorado, and she introduced me to him, and he has such an amazing story that I wanted to share it with everyone. So welcome, Aric. Welcome to the Millennial Buddhist podcast. How are you today?
Marvin, thanks for having me. I'm really doing quite well, thank you. And how about yourself?
I'm good. I'm happy. I'm here. And
Excellent.
I'm with you. It's always good to be in the presence of another member of the Sangha, even if it's electronically. I can still feel your presence.
Likewise.
So why don't you go ahead and just tell me and tell the audience a little bit about yourself and what brought you on the path to Buddhism.
Yeah, well, when we were talking before, you had mentioned something to the effect of, well, who is Aric? And I liked that question a lot. I thought that it was a good question, and I think it's maybe a question I'm still asking myself, in the sense that, maybe it was that sort of kind of existential question that I was first asking myself, and that might have been one of the big sort of motivators to enter into the Buddhist path. I'm even today, even this time, I'm still every single day I ask myself, who am I? Who is Aric really?
Mm-hmm.
What makes me me? And I think that's the point, and that was sort of my foundation. I was probably, in terms of coming to the Buddhist path, I ended up probably asking myself that question many, many times throughout my formative years. And I remember being around 13 years old when I really started very deeply questioning and asking these sort of existential quandaries.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's just one cause, and that there's many other causes to what made me become a Buddhist, or a so-called Buddhist.
Mm-hmm.
That initially, I think it was probably a combination of two different causes. One, and most of them were suffering. And that's the the fundamental truth of the Buddhist teachings. That's like when he first started doing his Dharma teaching, that was the first thing that he had mentioned. He was saying, well, there are four truths. So when he first gave the instruction to the I think it was at Deer Park.
A deer park, yeah.
Yep, and he gave the wheel turning discourse, and the first thing he said was he said there is suffering, basically.
Do you think that's similar for a lot of people? Do you think that it there's a kind of like a darkness or some type of suffering that brings people onto a spiritual path?
Absolutely. In fact, I feel at this point relatively good about it. It seems like it's almost sort of like built in to the way the system works. Is that suffering reminds us how to wake up,
Mm-hmm.
and that maybe without suffering, would we ever really want to wake up? And I keep kind of asking myself, well, would we really want to wake up if I hadn't gone through what I went through?
Yeah.
Which just for a small taste of that, I mean, I was adopted, so from a young age, I mean, I was 3 days old, and I imagine I was actually taken from my mother right away because she she put me up for adoption, my birth mother, that is.
Oh wow.
Um, and so there's some sort of subtle suffering that you come out of the womb, and then right away you're taken into someone else's arms. You don't get to spend time with the being that raised you. And so there's some instinctual heartbreak and suffering regarding that. And I'm not trying to use up the time that we have to pity myself or something like that.
No.
I feel like I've really spent quite a lot of time examining and taking the time to self nurture and all of that and coming to terms.
But
Um,
I think it's beneficial because I'm sure that there are other people also who have um, experienced something similar to that, some type of trauma, as far as being adopted is concerned. So
yeah,
how old were you when you found out that you were adopted?
I was young. I remember being around 4 years old. I mean, I don't really deeply remember being 4 years old. I can't say I have a really super sharp memory, but
Mm-hmm.
um, I I remember my parents telling me, like, well, I didn't, I remember my mom specifically say, well, you didn't come from me. I didn't give birth to you.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody else gave birth to you, but they were kind enough to give you to me because
Wow.
yeah. And so I knew they had phrased it. My mom had phrased it and put it in a way. I mean, I was given to an adoption agency, and then the adoption agency called my real parents and were like, hey, well, now your baby is here, and
Uh huh.
you're lucky. Um, so for me, it was I understood it. I heard it first at a young age, but then when I really understood it, when it started to sit in, I was I was like 11 or 12, and the truth of it started to sit in really heavily with me. I had
Mm-hmm.
you know I had always sort of battled depression in
Mm-hmm.
in my formative years, and I think that
Yeah.
that like seeing and experiencing suffering directly. I'm not. I recognize my privilege, where I'm coming from, but also I recognize that no matter where you're coming from and who you are, it seems to me that you're going to have to face some sort of suffering. That life isn't um, uh, all unicorns and butterflies and candy. You know,
That is, yeah, this is the nature of samsara.
right? Yeah, this is. I'm sorry. There's some sort of like cutting to satisfactory nature to it, like a cart with a bad axle. It's
Mm.
it's kind of just hobbling along this vehicle that we have here, and yeah. So there was that subtle realization of that, and I think also in my youth I had sexual trauma occur to me,
Mm.
and that was it was abuse, and that yeah, to me that was also a huge thing because it was it's very confusing when you're young, and it's also
Yeah.
later on, I think more or less you realize the sort of kind of impact that it had on you.
So
Um,
are you okay to speak about that now?
well, sure. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
not in depth and not in, I mean,
Of
not in,
course.
not in like graphic detail, but
Details, right?
at the same time, yeah, of course. I mean, like I said, like I feel like I have taken quite a lot of time to process trauma, work through my experience, and uh, get to where I'm at now, which is I can um, I can say specifically, that every day I face suffering, but also because I'm facing it with good-heartedness and good qualities, I feel content, you know, and I feel a sense of peace with my experience. Um,
I
yeah,
so that blows my mind because you know, I know how I feel about tiny insignificant things and how I blow them up sometimes. But someone who's experienced that kind of trauma, how do you come to terms with that? I mean, how do you even begin to sit down and want to deal with that? You know, because I don't know. I feel like that would be a place that I would just want to block out in my mind for the rest of my life.
Yeah, and you know, I did want to do that for a little while, to be honest. Um, yeah, I did want to go into that blocking out and acting out, and and I realized that there's no way I could do it. There was actually no way I could really block it out. Um, because the farther I pushed it away in my or the deeper I tried to bury it in my own mind, I realized that it was actually just planting the seed deeper and deeper again and
Mm-hmm.
again instead of actually allowing for things to come up and release. So
Hmm.
there was this quality of me not, the idea for me was, and I got it when I started meditating.
Hmm.
That is when I really understood, and I realized that something had to be done. Like, I'm suffering a whole lot. I had to come to this place where I felt so hopeless before I actually wanted to reach out for some antidote. At a young age, I was put into therapy because, I mean, imagine the trauma.
Right. So
It,
you told your parents about what happened.
sure, I told them and I told therapists, and actually I didn't tell my parents until I was in high school, like late high school.
Wow.
Yeah, and that was something that I didn't fully grasp until high school, and I kind of kept it inside, and yeah, that was something, that I think a lot of people end up doing that too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Partially because it happened at such a young age, and I realized that when these sort of things happen to you at a young age, there is some sort of quality of blocking out that happens, and it may have been a good defense mechanism for a young being that didn't understand what exactly was happening, you know. Um, so yeah, and I think that maybe that in that way it was kind of blocking it out from a very young age was good. There was no way for me, however, to block out the fact that I was adopted. Um,
Right.
and because people, everyone already knew, and that was a huge existential question for me. It's like, well, I didn't come from this being, I didn't come from the beings that are raising me. They didn't make me.
Mm-hmm.
On a fundamental too, like level, I'm a blonde hair, blue eyed guy. Both my parents have brown hair, and my my dad has brown eyes. My mom, she has blue eyes, but they don't look anything like what I look like. So it's
Mm-hmm.
interesting. I don't look anything like them really.
Mm.
And so there was this quality of like, oh, all these people around me, they look like their parents. Um,
Yeah.
and for me it was like, oh, I look nothing like my parents. And there was some sort of interesting interesting question there on an instinctual level. And for me it was the way that I worked with it was only really later. Yeah, it was only really later when I actually started working with my experience. I was about 13 and I was really asking a lot of existential questions, and um, started looking into, Western esotericism and like magical based philosophies and all these sort of like alternative minded things, and um, psychic phenomena. That was a huge one for me. I was really interested because I felt like I've always been kind of an empathic person,
Hmm.
and yeah, so it was after those looking sort of starting to look into those things that I started asking the questions. I started being like, well, how do I work with my experience here? I was raised in a Christian household, but a relatively liberal Christian. The United Church of Christ is renowned as one of the most liberal branches of Christianity and Protestant Christianity, in such that I know that they on the television for a little while they were airing some very liberal messages towards Christians of, you know, two men holding hands, two women holding hands walking into the church, two, a
Wow.
Muslim walking into a church, the Jew walking into the church, and basically saying like everyone is welcome here. We're just here to celebrate God or something like that. And I
Yeah.
felt like that was a really cool and nice message because I do feel that I had this sort of all inclusivity um, uh, nature in me from a young
Hmm.
age that I felt like it was weird to exclude people of any variety. Partially, I'm sure, because I felt like an odd egg, and I don't. It made me sort of feel sad, maybe at a fundamental level, to want to exclude people, um, and or to see people being excluded when that happens so much in our culture already. It just seemed ridiculous. But
To add more to it, yeah, it doesn't make any sense. And it's good that you were introduced to religion through such a warm and all-encompassing and
yeah,
welcoming group. It sounds, it sounds like a really good foundation for you to have.
it was, but at the same time, it very much was a good and special foundation. However, it, the Bible and the philosophy of Christianity didn't have the answers I was looking for. Didn't have the existential questions the answers. It didn't have any
Hmm.
of it. And um, yeah, so I sort of at that point I was like, what do I do? I was 13 years old and wanting to be confirmed by the church, but realizing, well, actually, I don't know if I totally take Jesus as my savior,
Hmm.
and that just eating a piece of um, wafer and drinking a little bit of wine can actually save my soul.
Mm.
It doesn't. I mean, I feel the energy of in a group of people of Jesus, and the energy of, and he seems like a really good guy, and like um, but I like the teachings that he's saying, love your neighbor, all this, all these things, like really
Hmm.
that makes sense to me. However, as far as working with the trauma of your human being, having it be dismissed as, well, you're a sinner and you messed up, and if you don't believe in Jesus, you're going to hell. That sort of basic philosophy, and that didn't that didn't mesh with me. I wasn't able to get behind that on a fundamental level.
It's
Yeah.
funny because when I was younger, I wanted to believe so bad. I really did.
Mm-hmm.
And, I really wanted to buy what they were selling, and there was still just this part of me that felt like no, that it wasn't right. Um and it was just purely only because of my sexuality, and I struggled with that for such a long and painful time. But I really wanted to buy into it. I honestly think um, if it wasn't for me being gay, that I don't know. I think that I would have chosen a very different path in life. So it's funny that you have the foresight to go and look and say, well, I really don't think this is right for me. But I was just like, please, something, give me something. I need salvation.
Yeah, I hear you. Um, for me, yeah, for me, it felt very much like I was lucky in the sense that I liked the foundational philosophy of what they were handing me in some ways, but I was maybe I was extra lucky because I didn't believe some of it. This sort of like salvation based philosophy, I for some part of me didn't buy it,
Hmm.
and didn't buy the fact that, well, now all of a sudden, just because I believe in Jesus, I'm saved, I'm special, and I can feel good about myself now. And it didn't answer any question for me. It seemed like it actually just added a lot more questions. And so
Yeah.
that was sort of like the initial formative thing that occurred. But it wasn't until I was actually, I can't remember where it was, but I was hanging out with my dad in a hot tub, and I was 15 and a half. I remember I was about that age, and he looks at me and sort of out of the blue was saying something like, "Well, I think that you seem like you would make a good Buddhist," or something to that, or or no, I always sort of saw you as a Buddhist,
Hmm.
is the language that he said. I always sort of saw you as a Buddhist,
Wow.
and I was like, well, what does that mean, Dad? I mean, where is that even coming from? And like,
Yeah.
my dad is like this. He's a scientist kind of dude, and he's a
Okay.
very science minded guy. And he let alone talking about religion, but then jumping into, a religion that I never heard him ever talk about before,
Wow.
saying, I always sort of saw you as a Buddhist. I thought that maybe that there was something else at work there.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
Maybe the universe was speaking through him or
Speaking
something.
directly. Yeah.
Yeah, and I at this point um I believe that. I can see that there was something else at work. And maybe some people might say, well, doesn't that seems a lot like the idea of God speaking or something like that. And I think that
Hmm.
maybe that there's some truth to that, or maybe, maybe it was just the Buddhas or higher beings or whatever you want to call it. Yeah,
Well, I think
something bigger.
it's your karma
Yeah,
to be reintroduced to it.
yeah, maybe it is my karma. And well, no,
Yeah.
this at this point I could say, from a Buddhist perspective, yeah, it definitely is my karma. It's where I'm at. Yes, but so at that point I was like, okay, sure, whatever. Yeah, I was 15 and a half and spunky and kind of a little bit of a punk, and so I was just like, yeah, whatever, it's fine.
Hmm.
And then it wasn't until about 16 um, that I really started examining that. And I had I think the cause for me examining that was that I had a dream about a Buddha, and
Mm.
and it felt, yeah, it was a blue Buddha, and the Buddha looked it didn't look like it had like robes on. It was like mostly like a just a blue luminescent shining Buddha sitting in lotus posture.
Like the medicine Buddha?
Kind of like the medicine Buddha. Yeah, maybe.
Okay.
But at this point, I would say probably closer to the Buddha Samantabhadra, because it was appearing to be naked,
Mm.
and didn't have, what do you call it, like robes on. It was just like pure radiant blue lights,
Okay.
no
Yeah.
no ornaments, no nothing, no.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I think maybe probably closer to this idea of the Buddha Samantabhadra. Um, and at this point I can say that. But for those people who have no idea what that is, it's there's in the retinue and pantheon of the Buddhist deities and different Buddhas, there's countless, many Buddhas, of course. It, um, Not just the Buddha Shakyamuni, who at least from the perspective of the Tibetan tradition, the Mahayana Buddhist traditions, many of them, they say that there's a huge pantheon of Buddhist deities, rather than just this one Buddha that came, named Shakyamuni or Siddhartha Gautama.
Hmm.
But anyway, so I had the dream of this. It was a dream. It wasn't like a visual waking experience, but yeah. So it was a dream, and it was meditating. And I remember waking up thinking, well, I want to meditate. Yeah, it was very clear. I want to meditate, and so it was at that time I stopped reading fiction, and only started studying the Buddhist sutras, um, and a little bit of Zen material, namely the Gateless Gate, the Koan book. And so, yeah, so it was the Pali Canon, sutras from the Pali Canon and Mahayana sutras. And I remember being really infatuated, totally nerdy. As a matter of fact, like I stopped reading fiction unless it was required for school. Uh, I had a drive to meditate, and
Wow.
yeah, I was still involved with, my communities. I had built strong community with people from my church, and I basically told the people in my church, well, yeah, now I'm a Buddhist, and
How'd that go over?
some of them looked at me kind of funny, and then some of them were like, well, that's cool.
Okay. All right.
And I mean, because like I said, the church I grew up in was really liberal, and
Hmm.
yeah, it was very all inclusive. And at the same time, I also noticed that, this is actually also my door out of here. And now it's time for me to focus on growing in this way rather than being a part of this community. Um, as far as my parents were concerned, they certainly thought it was interesting, but it didn't seem like it concerned them too much. Yeah, they didn't seem to like deeply affected by my change. In fact, maybe if anything, they thought that it was interesting somehow.
Hmm.
But they didn't seem like offended or hurt. Or I know I have a feeling that many very conservative Christian families might, if you tell them you want to be Buddhist. In fact, I know, I have this friend Joel who, um, He's a Sangha member that I practice with here
Mm-hmm.
in Boulder, and he came from Seventh Day Adventist uh, church and the Jehovah's Witnesses, right? And
Okay, all right.
and
That's the
it,
serious stuff.
and as soon as he decided to go and pursue non Jehovah's Witness stuff, they basically had to kick him out of the community, and his own parents had to take vows not to talk to him anymore.
That is awful.
Yeah, and of course that's not exactly how it works. I mean, his parents love him and still want to talk to him, but yeah, there is that um, the sadness of that kind of, it's real. That kind of thing, that kind of deep religiosity, whatever you want to call it, that's that sort of deep intensity of someone's religious faith is real, and for some people. And I'm lucky that my parents were in many ways supportive and just were like, oh, that's interesting, now that
Yeah.
you're doing that. We have no idea what that means, but it seems to be helping you grow and stop being depressed and wallowing in your own sadness, which after I spent years, at least 2 years meditating, I was able to take myself off any of the prescription medicine I had been raised with.
That's amazing.
Um,
That's awesome.
and I was, they had diagnosed me as someone who had ADHD. So I was one of those kids in the millennial generation who took Ritalin from the age of 5 until, in increasing doses until I was around 17 and a half, maybe 18.
Mm-hmm.
And by the time I was 18, uh, I had basically taken myself off of I was on Concerta at the time, which is Concerta is like a horse tranquilizer when you compare it to
Jeez.
Adderall.
Wow.
And so, I mean, just not actually like a horse tranquilizer, but it's
No, I
it's
know.
very it's very strong. It's like
Yeah.
a very deeply adult dose sort of thing. And I was also on Wellbutrin, which was an antidepressant. So I was really on. I was one of those people who in our samsaric society, what I say is our samsaric society. I was raised in a somewhat samsaric way, thinking that the right medicine for me was pills in order to make
Yeah.
in order to make me feel happy
Yeah.
and productive. But in reality, those didn't work. And actually, what did work was um, coming to terms with my experience through meditation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Meditation saves yet again.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And it's for me, it was a little bit sad because I didn't have a teacher at first. I didn't have a teacher until I was probably 21. Yeah, I was 21 when I found my what I would say my karmically connected teacher.
Okay.
Um,
Did you also go to Naropa?
yeah, I did. Yeah, and how I got there, of course, is a sort of interesting and I would say auspicious sort of catapult or slingshot.
How did you wind up at Naropa?
Well, alongside of me growing up and finding Buddhism when I was 16, I'd also been cooking at a really young age, and I actually at first was on my way towards culinary school. When I was 18, I was planning on leaving the school I was in and going into culinary school and becoming a chef and harnessing my artistic abilities and doing that. And that the sort of like visionary experiences um, kept occurring, and the meditation brought me to a place that I felt like um, I couldn't go back. I had hit a point in the rabbit hole, where there was no turning back, and
Mm-hmm.
there was all of a sudden many more questions that needed to be answered,
Mm-hmm.
and I wasn't able to actually get that sort of like intellectual fulfillment and experiential fulfillment, you know, slaving away in a kitchen um, that I was able to get when I was meditating and studying Dharma. And I ended up back in Cleveland, uh, living in the city of Cleveland, and I was working for a coffee house and going and taking general education credits at Cleveland State University, which is a public school and a public state school, and yeah, so it was good. I was taking introduction to religion classes and kind of building myself up for as a religious studies major,
Mm.
and really loving it, loving the idea of connecting with all these different traditions that I was looking into, and also just being, a general freshman in college, taking general education courses and trying to wonder where, am I really going to stick with it here at Cleveland State, or am I going to land somewhere else?
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I was working at this coffee house called the Phoenix. And if you're in Cleveland, they're really good, and you should go have some coffee there because they're awesome. But they uh, there was this one of my managers who at this point is her name is Marcy Phillips, but yeah, she at this point is more just like a friend, and she looked at me and she was like, you keep talking about wanting to go off and become a monk and just meditate and do all this stuff and just study Buddhism all the time. Why don't you go to Naropa University? And and I thought that was interesting when I heard about Naropa University. It hit some sort of special like buzzer in the back of my mind, and like all of a sudden it was like ding 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 something, and I was like, well, what is that place? And she mentioned, well, it's a school you can go and get an accredited degree, and you can study meditation and Buddhism there and get your religious studies degree like you want to. And I said, wow, well, that's very neat. Very cool that you're even bringing this up. So I looked into it, and it was exactly the place that I knew I was supposed to be. It's for any of those people who are, listening, the Naropa University is what they would say a contemplative or Buddhist inspired university, where all of their courses of study are inspired by the practice of meditation and learning to reflect experientially and contemplatively um, on your knowledge rather than just, what do you call it, memorizing textbooks and then regurgitating them.
Mm-hmm.
So there's some sort of special element to Naropa University in that it was definitely a huge catalyst for my spiritual growth and my growth as a Buddhist. But I knew that
So,
that was the place that I needed to go in order to find teachers, who could actually, experientially give me the knowledge of Buddhism rather than just intellectually. Yeah.
so how did you find your teacher?
Yeah. So, I was in school at Naropa. And initially, I found the Buddhist path because basically I was doing meditation every day for somewhere between 2 to 6 hours a day. I was very devoted to my practice, very, very devoted. And I would say Buddhist prayers, and I had all the like connection to many different types of Buddhist activities, such as chanting and all this stuff. Saying the mantra Om Mani Padme Hum, for instance, is a Tibetan mantra, and
Mm-hmm.
and then also just doing like the formalist meditation practice, much like Mahamudra Dzogchen. And so I was in one class. It was a class on Mahayana Buddhism taught by her name is Sarah Harding, or Lama Sarah Harding. At this point, she's a famous Tibetan translator, but she was one of the first Western lamas, or the first, yeah,
Oh wow.
Tibetan Buddhism, and she was a student of Kalu Rinpoche. Anyway, she looked at me and another really good Dharma friend of mine, and we were both in the same class, and said, "You guys, you need to go. There's a famous teacher coming. His name is Trungpa Rinpoche, and Kenshin Trungpa Rinpoche. If you don't know about him, he is one of the most educated. Uh, he's one of the last of the best, I would say. He's up
Mm-hmm.
there in terms of his education. He's up there with the Dalai Lama. He was the
Mm-hmm.
teacher to the Karmapa, one of the personal tutors to the Karmapa. Um,
This Karmapa?
yes,
This current?
the 17th, His Holiness the 17th Karmapa.
Uh-huh.
And so and he has the highest degree that you can get from your monastic shedra, which is Kenshin, or which means Great Kempo, which is basically the equivalent of like a PhD or two PhDs. You have to spend like 17 years studying to get this degree.
Yeah.
So it's quite a long time, and he's very educated in terms of Dharma knowledge in the Tibetan sphere. And so yeah, Lama Sarah Harding looked at me and my friend Gabe and was like, "You guys, you're going." It was a Green Tara empowerment, and and we went, and that was my first exposure to a formal refuge ceremony. I felt in one way that I'd already taken refuge, that I had, because I was saying it every day. I was still doing the practice of refuge in my own meditation and
Hmm.
doing Buddhist practice essentially, but I wasn't doing it formally under the auspice of a teacher or what have you like that. And so, it was after meeting um, Trungpa Rinpoche and going and receiving a Green Tara empowerment, which Green Tara is a female Buddha in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. And she, yeah,
She's my homegirl.
yeah, she's, if you're a Buddhist, the in the Tibetan tradition, it's one of the most well-known Buddhist deities. Um,
Hmm.
and a practice deity is what they call a Yidam deity in the Tibetan tradition, is like the deity that you practice with, or the deity that you connect with. And so after receiving that empowerment, I really felt not only the sense of magic of the Buddhist tradition, but I also felt a quite sort of naturalness about how everything unfolded from there. Because it was after I met Trungpa Rinpoche that I felt that there was some sort of in, uh, deepening wisdom that I had continually gained since taking refuge. Because after taking the empowerment with Trungpa Rinpoche, I was able to do. I felt more authorized to do more formal Buddhist practice, and I also felt, yes, I can take refuge because I have taken refuge. I now know why I'm taking refuge. I now know
So
what I'm taking refuge from.
prior to meeting him, you were just kind of guiding yourself.
Yeah, well, I mean, it was prior to meeting my teachers at Naropa. I was guiding myself, and I was doing so by being involved in the online Buddhist forums and being involved in the digital world Sangha
Okay.
and reading a lot and reading just a ton. And for me, it was quite good. I was reading an excellent amount of Dharma, and it was my whole life. It was it was what I was interested in, and it felt like my sort of like special calling to do. And but it was actually after meeting Trungpa Rinpoche, who I would say he's not my main teacher, but it was after meeting him and taking refuge formally as a Buddhist, and now then being able to say, well, I'm taking refuge as a Buddhist, and now I'm a Buddhist because um, I know about suffering, I know about why they're suffering, and I know about my motivation to leave it. And here's this path before me um, to leave it. But it was actually shortly. It must have been a little under half a year later that I met who I would call my personal karmically connected teacher. Who
The root guru.
my guru, or my
Okay.
my in the Tibetan tradition, of course, there's a lot of devotional stuff, but
Yeah.
in this day and age, you say the word guru and it's really loaded. It's hugely loaded, and to throw around the word guru, especially in this culture, because there's this idea of submitting yourself to a teacher
Yeah.
in that Westerners find totally inaccessible, because the Western mind wants to be able to be the guru. The
Yeah.
Western mind
Yeah.
wants to be able to be the best one.
Yeah.
They want to be able to be the person who is the elevated one. But
Yeah.
it wasn't, when I had met my guru, I had that complex. I can say that because I actually had that complex. I felt I've already done so much study. I'm already very knowledgeable, blah 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 blah, and like, I was very prideful. I remember specifically, this was a sort of a special time for me, but I was sitting in meditation, and I remember hearing somewhere in the back of my head, "You're really arrogant, aren't you? You're really arrogant, aren't you?" And I was like, "Whoa, where did that come from?" And I was thinking, well, am I just tripping out? Maybe I'm just a little spaced out from my meditation practice. And
Hmm.
because it seemed to come out of nowhere. And at the time, I was also a cigarette smoker. And I'm not so shy about that. I had been working in restaurants for on and off for uh, 4 years at that point, 5 years at that point. And so for me, it was 15, yeah, no, 6 years. So for me, it was, something that was very, very much like natural for me to be a smoker, because that's basically everybody in the restaurant industry is a smoker. And
Smoking. Yeah.
although at this point I'm a little shy about that fact, because it's very harmful, and I think that it's not good for people, and I can definitely see the negative effects on some of my older friends who smoked in their youth, and then also I can see the negative effects in me. And it's
Mm-hmm.
I'm glad that I was able to nip the butt, nip the bud. Isn't that the phrase? Nip the habit in the bud, or
Bud, yeah, nip it in the bud, yeah.
yeah. And so that was something that I felt was good to let go of. But anyway, so I was a smoker at the time, and I hear, for someone who has more context, that this will make sense. But I heard also in my meditation, I was like, you should really stop smoking. You're clogging your nadis, and the nadis, if you have any idea, nadis are the channels that run through the body. In the Tibetan system, they say there's energy channels that run through our body, and they're connected to the chakras. Or
Mm-hmm.
Tibetan system, they say it's Sa Lung Tigle, Sa meaning the channel, and then Lung meaning like prana, or like the life force, the breath, the wind, and then like Tigle meaning like the essence. Well, anyway, so they talk about this sort of thing, and I heard him say, you're clogging your channels. You should really stop. And I was like, whoa, where is this coming from? And of course, me being a rebel that I was, I sat up out of my practice and went and had a cigarette. And and because I have this, my ego has this sort of rebellious nature to it, and I'm aware of that. It causes me some sort of damage sometimes. But anyway, it was 3 days later that weekend I was supposed to go and have a interview, not an interview. I was supposed to do a meditation weekends class. It was 4 credit with this teacher named Anyan Rinpoche, who was a Tibetan from Amdo,
Mm-hmm.
a Nyingma teacher. Uh, so out of for those who may not know, the four or sometimes five different sects of Buddhism in the Tibetan Buddhism, they have many different ones, but the Nyingma tradition, is one of the four, and the other three, being Kagyu, Gelug, and Sakya. And the Dalai Lama is part of the Gelug tradition. The Karmapa is part of the Kagyu tradition. And so it's sort of like this. But anyway, I remember going to this class, and it was the first night. I was raising my hand to answer every question that Rinpoche, or my teacher, Anyan Rinpoche, was asking to the audience. And it was at a certain point that I raised my hands, and he calls on me, and he was like, I was trying to answer something about emptiness, and I raised my hand, and he looks at me, and he's like, "You're really arrogant, aren't you?" And it
Wow.
and it was like basically word for word what I had heard in my head a couple of days before meeting him. And so I was blown away. I didn't know what was left to say, and felt like in a way I was just given some sort of pointing out of emptiness, or some sort of like push into emptiness in a real
Mm-hmm.
experiential way, rather than
Mm-hmm.
just my intellectual mind trying to grasp onto something. And I felt for a second there like, wow, he just cut right through me. And actually, there was part of me that was like a little embarrassed, because we were in front of a group of probably 75 people in the room, and and I had just been called out by a teacher in front of those 75 people, and everyone was like, whoa,
Yeah.
it was like,
Been there.
and for a second I was like whoa. And shortly after that, I felt like a lot of warmth, and sort of like this interesting appreciation,
Mm.
because he did just, he sliced me open.
Mm-hmm.
And
That's what they're supposed to do.
yeah, that's exactly right. He had the sort of wisdom, and
Yeah.
like sliced right through my BS. And so it was after that, uh, I had no idea about the formality of how to treat a Tibetan teacher, and how they like to be
Mm-hmm.
treated. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't think he really cared too much. I think
Mm-hmm.
he saw where I was at. And so afterwards, I went up to him and to shake his hand and say thank you. It was towards the end of the weekend, and in the back of my head, I could hear, you should really stop smoking. You're clogging your channels. And of course, I'm sure he was in direct reach of me, and he could smell
Mm-hmm.
that I probably reeked like cigarettes.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, it was just like, whoa, this is too freaky. What's going on here? Um, I actually wasn't able to get him out of my head. It felt like after that.
Mm-hmm.
And But it was also at that point that I asked him, will you please take me? as one of your students. Can I please study with you? And it felt like it just came out of my mouth. Like I had no intention going, when I went up to greet him,
Yeah.
to like say anything like that. But it felt like it just came out of my mouth, and it it was very natural. And he was like, of course, yeah, and it's very kind, and and so I've been practicing with that sangha, for or what they call, or the Orgyen Kamdroling Sangha, um, uh, in Denver, and have watched it grow in many beautiful ways since I was 21. I'm 28 now, so that's about 7 years, I would say.
That's a long time. So it's really amazing the kind of the journey that you've gone from the beginning to having such suffering with the adoption and the abuse and then getting older and questioning everything, trying to block it, and
Yeah,
then of course society, you act a little bit differently, and so of course the doctor would say to your parents, well, he needs medication, and then getting yourself off of medication, then finding your own medicine,
right.
kind of teaching yourself, and then coming to the point where you found your teacher and also your sangha. So Aric, it's absolutely positively amazing story
Well,
that
thank
you
you.
have, and just thank you so much for sharing it with me and with everyone else who's listening. I think that when we share and we're open like this, um, especially for the things that are a little bit tougher to talk about,
Sure.
it helps because it's sad, but you're not going to be the only person who's gone through this, and I believe that your message will help someone else, and especially for people who I know a lot of practitioners who started out similarly to the way that you did, to where they were kind of just teaching themselves, going through books and things like that, and then getting a formal education. So I think this will really help, especially for people like that. That's really what I'm seeing right now.
Yeah. Wow, thank you for saying that. It's very validating to hear. And also, I really do hope that if there's anything inspiring, in my story, that it can be of true benefit for people. This is it's hard times we're living in. A lot of really intense.
Yeah.
In many ways, it's very beautiful. But like this life we're living, in many ways, it continues to be a situation of intense suffering. Uh, and there's a lot of people out there who are suffering, and
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that we're actually, I don't think, the work that you're doing and the work that I'm doing, I don't think that we're really done, until in until everyone's done, really.
Yeah, and all sentient, each and every single one without exception.
Yeah, yeah,
That's the vow. That's
yeah,
the vow you take, and that's the phrase that you just constantly repeat over and over and over again. It's ingrained
right,
into your head.
right.
So, especially, and we were talking about Tara earlier, and I just love whenever I look at Tara, I always look at her foot, the right foot that's always extended out because she's always ready to help,
Right.
and it just touches my heart so much. Like she's always ready to get up and help.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. She's ready to
uh,
jump into action.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And so there are days when I'm just like, Tara, let me be just like you. Let me be ready to help and get in there and help others. Then there are other days where I'm just like, Tara, I need you to get up. Please
Help
help
me.
me. Yes. So, um,
Yeah, I
yeah.
get it.
So,
And this is a side of Buddhism that I think is interesting, because um, there's this element of it being devotional, and that
mhm,
actually a devotion can somehow bring us to awakening too. And I think that this part of the tradition of Tibetan Buddhism, for instance, was the side that I was drawn to in a way. I like this sort of living quality of
mhm,
of the wisdom, rather than the I'm just going to sit and meditate. And I like this, just sitting and meditating too. Don't get me wrong; it's really good and it's very helpful to be able to examine your mind. But also this quality of recognizing that, well, they're Buddhas for a reason, and they have good
mhm,
qualities for a reason.
mhm,
And also those good qualities are reflected back towards our own nature, for a reason. In order to help us see our own nature, If
Yeah.
you pray, you pray to Tara, you pray to Buddha, or you pray to medicine, any of these beings, you pray to any of these beings, and well, really, you're praying to this archetype of your own nature,
Right.
and it's not something it's um it's not personal, but in
Mm,
a way, it's the most personal,
right.
but it's also it's totally beyond this idea of being a person or not a person.
It's very interesting what you're saying about, praying like to the manifestation of what is already inside of you.
Mm,
So you're looking out physically with your eyes, and you're looking at this image, and you're praying to it, but really you're just praying to something that's already there inside of you.
indeed. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's very helpful, I think, in many ways. It brings about similar results to sitting in meditation and embodying the practice. And ultimately, I would say all practices of meet at a single point. And this is if for those who understand, those Sangha who are listening who understand this idea of mind training or lojong. Um, there's a famous phrase or mind training slogan. This idea that we train our minds through reciting slogans or through contemplating slogans or ways of thinking. Um, this idea is all dharmas meet at a single point, and what that means is that you can sit in meditation, you can recite a mantra, you can do chanting, you can do prayer, you can have devotion, or you can have make aspirations, and really they all lead you to the same place.
Mm.
Much like this, maybe often, I don't know, maybe it's an overused metaphor, but um, one mountain, many paths.
Mm-hmm.
That like
Mm-hmm.
there's many different paths that go up the side of a mountain. Some are steeper, some are kind of a longer route, but
Yeah.
whatever direction whatever path you take, it's going to take you to the top of the mountain, and that's a single point. And so the realization of the Dharma, or the realization of emptiness, or the realization of Dzogchen, or the realization of, I think most importantly, bodhicitta, or the idea of like the heart of awakening or awakened heart or awakened mind is, it's all the same essence. It's all the same sort of spirit of the teaching. Is there's just many different ways to get there. And I think for those out there who are entering the path or who are traveling the path, you can feel confident that where you're at in the path is exactly where you need to be, because um, in order to progress somehow, you have to go through whatever you're experiencing right now. And what that looks like for you, Marvin, or what that looks like for me is so much different. Um, but at the same time, of course, here we are meeting each other, and we share some part of that.
Yep.
But what it takes for you to get there, what it takes for me to get there, maybe sometimes it looks kind of similar, but it's also completely unique, which is something special, I think, about the way that the Buddhist tradition is unfolding in the West here.
Yeah. And so the Buddha gave 84,000 teachings.
Right. Oh,
It's
yeah.
because there were 84,000 different, I guess, types of people who needed to hear the message in a specific way. So
Yeah.
that's what you're saying is right there. Um, there's different roads to the top of the mountain, but it's still just one single peak, and that's what you're trying to get to.
There are
It's that
indeed.
single peak. Yeah.
There are indeed.
So, Aric, I just want to thank you so much for joining us today, and for sharing your story, and for being such a great guest. We really appreciate it. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Sure, I'm so glad. And if I could have just a second more to say one more thing, I
Sure.
really appreciate you hosting, and what you're doing is excellent work. And this sort of engaged Buddhist work is exactly what we need, I think, in the West in order to perpetuate, in order to help the tradition of Buddhism grow, which I think where we are as practitioners in the West is yeah, we find it to be a living tradition, and like the living wisdom of the tradition is what is so appealing to us. Probably, if I'm not
Mm.
overstepping my bounds by speaking for you, I hope not. But
Oh no,
but
no, yeah,
at the same time, I also recognize that like you're promoting it in a way that you recognize that someone out there is looking for exactly what you're doing, and
yeah.
um, and I'm happy to that person who's listening right now and saying yes, oh my gosh, yes, you guys are talking about exactly what I was looking for, and exactly this kind of mindset that I'm wanting to enter into. And so I just want to thank you, Marvin, for having the time to host me, and the special kind of bodhisattva work that you're doing.
Thank you so much, Aric. It really comes from um, a place where I lived in Nepal for some time, and I was surrounded by the Dharma. I was surrounded by this amazing, phenomenal, unbelievably supportive sangha,
Mm.
and then I had to come home. I had to come back, and I had to come to Texas, and it was just this weird reverse culture shock for me.
Nepal to Texas. Yep.
Nepal to Texas. So, um, I just there have been times in my life where I just felt so empty because I didn't have anyone to talk to about
Yeah.
these types of things, and there wasn't really an outlet for me to go to. I didn't feel like so. That's really where this comes from.
Mm.
So anybody who's listening to this, whether you're in Texas or Tibet, if you're in Miami or Malaysia, it doesn't really matter. This I just want this to be a home for people who want to seek or know more, and this will always be your home.
Great.
So
Well, thanks so much for your time, and I wish all the best to you and your show, and I hope down the line we can have another chat.
awesome. Yes. I look forward to that as well. Thank you. And a very special thank you to everyone who's listening to this podcast. Please visit my website, millennialbuddhist.com. You can also get in contact with me through Facebook and Instagram, Millennial Buddhist. Let me know what you think. If you like it, if you don't like it, if you want to see something change, or maybe there's someone you want to hear from. Definitely hit me up on social media and stay tuned for our next episode.